If you like soccer, well, welcome to America. See, our country already has entertainment. So watching people chase a ball around for 4 hours to end 0-0 is not enjoyable. Unless, of course, the bleachers collapse and half of Europe dies. That was Daniel Tosh. And that one's just for you.
From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where, in keeping with the theme of tonight's monologue, you can feel free to flame me in the chat, but you have to type using only your feet and your head, maybe your chest if you're a lady, and do send pictures if you do that. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Last Radio. So glad to have you here with us tonight. We promise to have you home safe and sound in 90 minutes' time, hopefully with none of your clothes on backward. Now, at the risk of being a wet blanket, when we're in the middle of baseball opening week, always one of the most glorious periods on the national sporting calendar. But there's another thing we need to talk about because it's coming up very soon, sooner than perhaps some of us might like. And regrettably, it is soccer, the World Cup, to be specific, the biggest sporting event that human civilization has to offer, in which we, the United States, have the privilege to be hosting this year, along with our neighbors, Canada and Mexico. Why do we need to have three host nations? Well, who can say, really? But at least under this arrangement, you've got one host nation where soccer is among the three most popular professional spectator sports. Is that Canada? No, it most decidedly is not. Everybody knows the three most popular sports in Canada are hockey, Canadian football, and clubbing baby seals to death, followed closely by lacrosse, baseball, competitive poutine eating, and then possibly soccer. And we know it ain't the United States because we've had a big four for many a decade now, and soccer ain't in it. Don't get the host wrong. Soccer at the professional level in the United States has made great strides these past few decades in terms of profitability and credibility alike. In fact, I was surprised to read recently that the MLS, according to the fancy experts whose job it is to make such judgments, is now being ranked as one of the top 10 soccer leagues in the whole wide world. The Mexican League, they're at number 19, which I'm sure makes the Mexicans very happy indeed. I never would have guessed that before I went and looked it up, but there it is. It wouldn't have occurred to me that the MLS is playing a more high quality brand of soccer than they play in the Dutch league or the Danish league or even the Argentinian league of all things, much less the Mexican league. In my mind, in the abstract, I imagine all those countries having a better top flight soccer league than we do, but I guess that's not the case anymore. But that's what the metrics say, so who the hell am I to argue? The point being, Thank God that in Mexico, we have 1 out of 3 World Cup host nations where soccer is actually the most popular sport. And before we proceed, we need to take a moment to talk about nomenclature and the word soccer in specific. There are some people, idiots, I believe they're called, and who seem to be overwhelmingly English, but I leave it to you fine people to determine if there is a causal relationship there, who operate in the erroneous belief that the word soccer is some sort of vulgar Americanism that carries an automatically pejorative connotation. Is any of that true? It is not. In point of fact, the term soccer was coined by Englishmen themselves in order to differentiate association football from rugby football. The kicking game they called soccer, the carrying game they called rugger, and it was as simple as that. To the extent that there are a few countries where association football is commonly referred to as soccer, there's a very simple reason for that. Because those countries have different football codes that are more popular than association football is. In Canada and the US, when you say football, it's commonly assumed that you're talking about gridiron football. In Australia and New Zealand, association football is arguably the 4th most popular code of football after rugby league, rugby union, and Australian rules. So there is nothing complicated really about any of this. In English-speaking countries where association football is not the most popular football code, it is called soccer. It is just a word. It carries no negative or dismissive connotation. And if hearing it causes you to get offended, it's safe to say that you don't have any real problems in your life. So congratulations on that. Now, if you're old enough to remember the year 1994, and if you're not, you are decidedly outside this channel's core demographic, you may have a vague memory of the United States having hosted the World Cup once before, which, in fact, we did. And we didn't even have our own professional outdoor soccer league at that time. In fact, the creation of the MLS was one of the conditions that we had to satisfy in order to host the event, and they didn't even start playing until 1996, 2 years after that World Cup had ended. So it goes without saying that we also didn't have any soccer-specific venues back then, so the World Cup games were all played in NFL and college football stadiums, which are decidedly non-ideal as soccer venues go. This year, the country is overflowing with purpose-built soccer stadiums now. Something like half of the clubs in the MLS have their very own soccer-specific venues now, some of which are really quite nice. But, amazingly, all of this year's World Cup matches will again be played in NFL and college football stadiums because those purpose-built MLS venues mostly have capacities in the 25, 35,000 seat range, but FIFA demands that World Cup venues have a minimum capacity of 40,000, which seems like a bit of an own goal to this reporter. And no, that will not be the last soccer metaphor here. It would be possible to have a World Cup in the United States where all of the matches were played in soccer-specific venues, and it would be great. But over a matter of just a few thousand seats, all of those venues are going to go unused. Now, why does FIFA have the reputation of being the stupidest governing body in all of sports? I don't know. It's a real mystery. Oh, and there's 48 teams in the field now, if you didn't know, which seems a bit excessive, but nobody asks me about these things. And we still don't even know the identity of 6 of those. Italy, in fact, might fail to qualify for the 3rd time in a row. Would you believe that? But that obstacle notwithstanding, we are here to do a damn field guide, and a field guide we shall do. So here is the arrangement. In order to acquaint you with the historical perspective and the current day perspective, which is what we like to do around here, according to the official FIFA World Rankings, here are the 10 countries most likely to win this year's event and the previous journey that got them up to this point. Number 1, Spain. Now, Spain being number 1 in the rankings may surprise some Americans because Spain does not loom in our sporting imagination the way that Brazil does, nor does it carry the cinematic baggage of England, nor produce the sort of tabloid emotional instability in which the French specialize. But for roughly the past 20 years, Spain has been one of the great proofs that a national sporting philosophy, if adhered to stubbornly enough, can briefly make everybody else look as though they are playing a different game entirely. Before 2008, Spain had a reputation rather like that of a gifted graduate student who somehow kept failing the oral exams. Immense talent, beautiful domestic clubs, excellent technical players, and an uncanny inability to convert any of that into tournament success when the pressure became international. Then suddenly, over the course of 4 extraordinary years, they won the UEFA European Championship, then the 2010 World Cup, then the UEFA European Championship again, which at the time felt faintly unfair, as though someone had discovered a loophole in geometry. Their style became known everywhere as tiki-taka, Endless short passing, patient possession, movement so meticulous that opponents sometimes appeared less like competitors than unwilling participants in a public demonstration. It was soccer as administrative suffocation. You did not so much lose possession against Spain as gradually realize you had not seen the ball in several minutes and were beginning to miss it personally. A great deal of this came from FC Barcelona because Spain's golden generation happened to coincide with Barcelona producing midfielders in such numbers that one suspected they were growing them hydroponically somewhere beneath the city. The amusing thing historically is that Spain spent generations being spectacularly emotional about club football while often underachieving internationally. In Spain, club loyalties are not merely sporting preferences, they are often extensions of regional identity, political grievance, historical memory, and occasionally civilizational argument conducted through scarves, which means the national team always had to borrow unity from a country that is not always certain that it wishes to be singular. And yet somehow, when it worked quite beautifully. Modern Spain is slightly less hypnotically dominant than that imperial phase, but still dangerous because Spanish football culture never stopped manufacturing technically gifted players who appear offended by the concept of hurried decision making. To play Spain is to spend 90 minutes chasing geometry while wondering whether your own midfield has dissolved entirely. Number 2, Argentina. If Spain represents organized geometry, Argentina represents something much closer to permanent emotional combustion. There are countries where soccer is popular, countries where soccer is culturally important, and then there is Argentina, where soccer often appears less like recreation than like a national weather system. This is a country that has produced 2 of the most mythologized players the sport has ever seen. Diego Maradona, who behaved like a revolutionary pamphlet come to life when he wasn't snorting the sideline, and Lionel Messi, who somehow became universally accepted as the quiet little genius, even while rewriting half of the statistical record book. Maradona gave Argentina its 2nd World Cup in 1986, almost by force of personality, aided by 1 goal of supernatural brilliance and another achieved by punching the ball in with his hand while pretending that nothing unusual had occurred. A maneuver immortalized as the hand of God, which remains one of the few moments in sports history where outright cheating was later folded into theology. Messi, by contrast, spent years carrying the peculiar burden of being one of the greatest players in history, while large portions of his own country politely suggested he had not yet suffered enough to be considered fully Argentine. That changed when Argentina won the 2022 World Cup, at which point the national mood became something between canonization and controlled collapse. What Americans should understand is that Argentine football culture thrives on productive anxiety. Even when winning, they often appear to believe catastrophe is assembling itself nearby. Their domestic league remains gloriously unstable, deeply passionate, and capable of producing atmospheres in which flares, drums, and minor existential crises all coexist comfortably. The great cathedral of this spirit remains La Bombonera in Buenos Aires, home of Boca Juniors, where spectators bounce so violently that the stadium itself appears to reconsider its engineering assumptions. Argentina's national style has always blended technical elegance with a faint willingness to commit crimes if necessary. They can play beautifully, theatrically, cynically, or vindictively, often within the same half. And unlike certain nations we will shortly discuss, when Argentina reaches a final, they generally behave as though they believe history owes them the inconvenience. Number 3, France. France is perhaps the most French football nation imaginable. Brilliant, sophisticated, stylish, structurally impressive, and periodically seized by internal arguments so fierce one suspects somebody may leave the training ground having denounced somebody else's philosophy of civilization. France has won 2 World Cups, in 1998 on their home soil and in 2018 in Russia, both times with squads so loaded that other countries could reasonably complain about unfair demographic abundance, because modern French football benefits enormously from the fact that France, through empire and migration alike, built itself a talent pool extending far beyond what one might expect from metropolitan geography alone. The result is a national team that often looks like half the former colonial map arriving at once and playing magnificent football. At its best, France combines physical power, technical grace, and tactical flexibility in ways that make them faintly alarming. At its funniest, France periodically stages internal mutinies. No country of this caliber has so frequently managed to look as though it might collapse because several players and administrators have stopped speaking to one another in principle. The famous example came in the 2010 World Cup when players effectively revolted against management, refused training, and produced one of the great self-inflicted absurdities in tournament history. And yet 4 years later, they were respectable again. And 8 years later, they were world champions again because French football possesses industrial recovery capacity. Much of this institutional power flows through the French Football Federation, and especially the academy at Clairefontaine, where France manufactures polished young talent with almost suspicious consistency. And then there is Kylian Mbappe, who plays with such speed that defenders often look like they have received late notice of an emergency. France's greatest strength is that when they appear disorganized, they usually possess enough talent to improvise solutions. Their greatest weakness is that they occasionally become bored by their own superiority and wander emotionally into avoidable trouble. A French tournament is therefore never merely tactical, it is philosophical. Number 4, England. England invented the modern rules of the sport and has spent most of the subsequent century and a half being haunted by that fact. This is a nation whose football culture is so omnipresent that entire weekends are structured around it, whose press treats every major tournament like a referendum on national morale, and whose national team has won exactly one World Cup in 1966. That victory occurred on their home soil. It involved a disputed goal against Germany that remains disputed by Germans because Germans regard unfinished historical grievances as a civic responsibility, and it supplied England with enough commemorative material to sustain several generations. Since then, England has specialized in arriving at tournaments with elite talent and departing under conditions of theatrical melancholy. No country has turned penalty shootouts into such a durable psychological genre. English football culture itself is extraordinary, vast, loud, wealthy, tribal, and globally exported through the enormous commercial reach of the Premier League, which may currently be the most internationally consumed domestic sports league outside of our own National Football League. That league has made English clubs rich enough to purchase talent from everywhere else, which sometimes creates the amusing paradox that England's domestic football appears globally dominant while its national team continues negotiating with its own nerves. At tournaments, England often plays under the burden of a phrase Americans would know all too well. It is coming home. This slogan appears every cycle, meaning that football invented in England is destined to return home in triumph at some point, but it usually does not. Still, recent England sides have improved enormously. Younger, calmer, tactically more modern, less prone to immediate panic. They reached the semifinal in the 2018 World Cup and the final of UEFA Euro 2020, which means England now carries a dangerous combination: talent and moderate competence, which historically is a rare overlap. Yet no one suspects the nation will not feel emotionally safe until it wins again, at which point half the country may still complain that it was not done attractively enough. Number 5, Brazil. Brazil is the country Americans imagine first when somebody says World Cup, and for once, popular instinct is entirely justified. No nation has won more World Cups than Brazil's 5, which began in 1958 and continued through eras so rich in footballing mythology that entire generations elsewhere learned to treat yellow shirts as a shorthand for excellence. Brazilian football has long been sold, sometimes accurately, sometimes lazily, as joy made athletic, dribbling, improvisation, flair, rhythm, audacity, and an apparent cultural refusal to believe that the simplest route is automatically the most desirable one. This mythology became global through figures like Pelé, perhaps the first footballer to become universally legible even in countries that barely followed the sport. Pelé arrived as a teenager, won the 1958 World Cup, and essentially informed the world that Brazil intended to remain a permanent subject of conversation. Then came generations of names that Americans vaguely know, even if they don't know why. Zico, Romario, Ronaldo, and others whose highlights often resemble editing tricks. But Brazil also carries one of football's deepest national scars, the 7-1 semifinal loss to Germany in the 2014 World Cup on home soil, a result so shocking that it briefly felt like numerical satire. It's difficult to explain to Americans how emotionally impossible that scoreline seemed before the game was played. Imagine the New York Yankees losing a postseason game 27-1 in New York City while everyone watches in horrified silence. And that was roughly the scale of what happened here. Modern Brazil remains dangerous because even when tactically imperfect, they produce attackers who appear raised under private agreements with gravity. But modern Brazil also lives under old expectations. To merely contend is insufficient. Brazil believes football ought to look Brazilian when it is won, and that aesthetic requirement sometimes complicates practical survival. Number 6, Portugal. Portugal spent much of football history existing beside Spain like an intelligent younger cousin who kept producing excellent musicians but fewer trophies. And then came Cristiano Ronaldo, and suddenly Portugal became globally unavoidable. Ronaldo's significance to Portugal simply cannot be overstated. He is not merely their greatest player, but the central gravitational object around which 2 decades of national expectation have revolved. He has scored enough goals internationally that one begins to suspect arithmetic fatigue. And yet the amusing thing is that Portugal's greatest national triumph, winning UEFA Euro 2016, involved Ronaldo leaving the final injured early, and then spending the rest of the match pacing the sideline like a substitute assistant manager possessed by caffeine. Portugal won anyway, defeating France in France, which remains a deeply Portuguese way to acquire historical credibility. Elegant, improbable, slightly inconvenient to somebody larger who lives nearby. Portuguese football traditionally combines technical refinement with a certain tactical caution. They often possess players of exquisite ability and then behave as though somebody worried might notice. Much of the country's football identity is shaped by clubs like SL Benfica and FC Porto, institutions that develop talent partly because Portugal long ago perfected the art of identifying gifted young footballers and then selling them abroad at prices that keep the domestic system alive. This has made Portugal disproportionately influential relative to its population. The modern side is interesting because it is slowly transitioning from being Ronaldo's long shadow into a squad where younger players increasingly matter just as much. Whether Portugal can emotionally complete that transition while Ronaldo remains present is another matter entirely, because every Portuguese tournament still carries the question: are they finally becoming fully collective, or are they still waiting for history to ask the old man one more question? Number 7, the Netherlands. The Dutch, if you prefer. The Netherlands may be the finest football nation never to win a World Cup, which is very Dutch in the sense that it combines elegance, efficiency, and lingering frustration. Dutch football gave the world one of the most influential tactical revolutions ever devised. It was called total football, perfected in the 1970s, in which players rotated positions so fluidly that defenders became midfielders became forwards, and opposing coaches looked as though someone had rearranged the furniture while they were out. The supreme prophet of this doctrine was Johan Cruyff, whose influence on football tactics now extends so far that half of modern elite coaching still sounds like annotated footnotes to his opinions. And yet, for all this intellectual prestige, the Dutch lost the finals of the 74 World Cup and the 78 World Cup and the 2010 World Cup. 3 finals, 0 trophies. This has given Dutch football an almost philosophical melancholy. Admired everywhere, completed nowhere. Their domestic league, the Eredivisie, remains one of Europe's finest developmental environments, though wealthier leagues now strip talent away quickly. Still, Dutch academies continue producing technically gifted players who seem educated in geometry even before adolescence. The Dutch national style remains recognizably Dutch, even when the personnel changes. Positional discipline, ball intelligence, tactical seriousness, and occasional impatience when reality fails to obey the plan, which, again, does feel rather culturally appropriate. No country so small has contributed so disproportionately to how modern football thinks about itself. But they still lack the one medal that everybody notices first. And because of that, every Dutch tournament carries a faint subtext. Perhaps this time the philosophers finally receive a practical reward. Number 8, Morocco. Morocco's presence in the top 10 is not ceremonial. It is earned, recent, and historically significant. Their run to the semifinal of the 2022 World Cup was one of the great modern tournament stories. The first African nation ever to reach that stage, achieved not through luck or sentiment, but through disciplined, ferocious, tactically mature football. What made Morocco remarkable was how little they resembled underdog stereotypes. They defended superbly, counterattacked intelligently, and eliminated serious powers without looking astonished afterward. This mattered not merely in Morocco, but across Africa and the Arab world, because Morocco's success immediately acquired symbolic weight that was larger than sport. Crowds from far beyond Rabat or Casablanca adopted them as regional standard bearers. And unlike many surprise semifinalists, Morocco looked institutionally repeatable. Much of this stems from an increasingly sophisticated federation strategy and a deliberate cultivation of diaspora talent. Players raised in European academies but eligible to play for Morocco, creating a squad with technical polish and strong identity simultaneously. And that model has worked rather brilliantly. Their style now combines European tactical schooling with unmistakable emotional intensity. Moroccan crowds are magnificent, loud, coordinated, relentless, and deeply aware that football offers a rare stage where national visibility can be amplified dramatically. For American audiences, Morocco is important because they demonstrate something that many casual fans miss. The modern football world is no longer neatly confined to old European and South American monopolies. The old powers do remain powerful, yes, but the perimeter has become dangerous. And Morocco currently occupies that perimeter like a country that is fully aware it has already changed expectation once and may enjoy doing so again. Number 9, Belgium. Belgium spent years being labeled football's golden generation, which is a lovely phrase until you notice that golden generations are expected to do something memorable. For over a decade, Belgium possessed astonishing individual talent. Kevin De Bruyne, Eden Hazard, Romelu Lukaku, and others sufficient to make their squad sheet look like somebody had accidentally assembled a European all-star team inside a medium-sized monarchy. Yet the major title never materialized. Their best World Cup showing came third place at the 2018 event, respectable but insufficient for the mythology that had accumulated. Belgium's deeper football oddity is that it is a country not always entirely persuaded of its own national coherence. A nation divided linguistically between Dutch-speaking and French-speaking regions somehow produced one of the most stable football development systems in all of Europe. This alone deserves administrative praise. Belgian football became modern by rebuilding youth coaching aggressively, emphasizing technical skill and intelligence rather than merely physical traits. The results were nothing short of spectacular, but golden generations do age, and Belgium now lives in that awkward interval where legacy names linger while younger replacements attempt to establish authority. They remain dangerous because institutional habits tend to endure. Yet there is also the lingering suspicion that Belgium may always be remembered more for potential than for completion, which for a country famous internationally for waffles and diplomatic headquarters feels faintly unfair, but not entirely inaccurate. Number 10, Germany. Germany approaches football the way Germany approaches most organized human activities, methodically, efficiently, and with an unnerving institutional confidence that suggests contingency planning began some months ago. They have won 4 World Cups, most recently at the 2014 event, and unlike many countries, Germany almost never arrives at major tournaments looking emotionally surprised by the concept. Even when they are not favored, they tend to advance deeply because German football culture treats tournament structure as something to be solved. Historically, Germany's reputation came from resilience so durable that opponents often considered a 1-goal lead provisional until final confirmation arrived in writing. This produced decades of jokes that Germans were not necessarily more artistic than others, merely less interested in unnecessary suffering. Then modern Germany became more technical, more fluid, more adventurous, especially after youth reforms following poor early 2000s performances. The result was a side that in 2014 dismantled Brazil 7-1 in one of the sport's most surreal spectacles. That score remains so absurd that even now it sounds something like a fabrication. Yet Germany has recently shown signs of mortality. Early exits in both the 2018 World Cup and the 2022 World Cup, prompting national hand-wringing normally reserved for economic alarms. German football culture remains formidable because of club structures like Bayern Munich, whose domestic dominance is so relentless that the rest of Germany periodically resembles a constitutional opposition. And German crowds remain among Europe's finest, organized, loud, and notably less aristocratic in ticket culture than England's upper-tier pricing model, to name one example. A dangerous Germany is never a surprising thing. A struggling Germany is always treated as temporary because Germany, unlike England, does not regard historical disappointment as personality. It regards it as a problem that requires correction. And now, as a special bonus addendum, we present 5 countries outside the top 10 that are most likely to ruin somebody else's afternoon at this year's event. Am I in any way remotely qualified to be making any of these judgments? I am not, but hey, it's only soccer. Number 1, Uruguay. Uruguay is the smallest country that behaves like a football superpower because historically, in football terms, it absolutely is one. This is a nation of barely 3.5 million people that has won 2 World Cups. The inaugural event in 1930 and the unforgettable 1950 World Cup, the latter achieved by defeating Brazil in the Maracanã Stadium before a crowd so enormous that Brazilians still speak of it in tones normally reserved for maritime disasters. That 1950 victory is known simply still as Maracanazo, roughly translated as the thing that happened in the Maracanã that should not have happened. Uruguay's football culture is built around a concept that they call garra charrua, stubbornness, defiance, refusal to concede emotional territory, and an apparent willingness to regard elegance as optional if victory remains available by grimmer means. This makes Uruguay one of the least enjoyable draws imaginable for glamorous opponents. They may not always dominate their possession, but they specialize in making prettier teams wonder why every pass now feels personally inconvenient. And because Uruguay produces elite players at a rate that makes demographic sense impossible, they routinely remain competitive long after larger nations assume that they ought to have faded. For Americans, the easiest comparison is a small college that somehow keeps producing terrifying defensive linemen and upsetting larger programs each and every November. Nobody understands how they keep doing it, but by now, everyone accepts that they will. You never relax against Uruguay. Even when they appear old, tired, or tactically limited, they still carry a national instinct for making tournaments unpleasant for somebody who is larger and wealthier. Number 2, Croatia. Croatia's population is smaller than metropolitan Los Angeles, yet they have reached 1 World Cup final and another semifinal in barely 3 decades of independent existence. This should not happen as often as it does. Croatia emerged as an independent football nation only after the breakup of Yugoslavia, but almost immediately behaved as though tournament composure had been inherited wholesale. Their third-place finish in the 1998 World Cup announced them rather dramatically. Their run to the final at the 2018 event confirmed that this was not any sort of historical novelty. The key to Croatia is midfield intelligence bordering on stubborn artistry, most famously embodied by Luka Modric, who has spent years looking physically modest while controlling entire matches as though quietly rearranging furniture that nobody else noticed. Croatia's style often looks deceptively calm until one realizes they have once again dragged a stronger opponent into extra time, at which point they become alarmingly comfortable. Penalty shootouts do not frighten them nearly as much as they ought to. And because Croatia carries strong tournament memory without overwhelming external expectation, they often appear psychologically freer than do some of the larger powers. Americans should think of Croatia as the unnervingly competent department that nobody notices until the project deadline arrives, and somehow they have solved the whole thing already. They are never loud until it's necessary. Then suddenly they are still in the quarterfinals while somebody richer is booking their flight back home. Number 13, Mexico. Mexico is the country most likely to produce a World Cup atmosphere in North America that feels like the World Cup before the tournament has even properly begun. because wherever Mexico plays on this continent, Mexico generally arrives with half of the stadium already emotionally occupied. Mexican football culture is enormous, loud, deeply rooted, and entirely unwilling to behave like a supporting cast. The national team has one peculiar modern specialty, reaching the round of 16 and then exiting there with almost ritual consistency. For years, this became such a pattern that it acquired its own tone of fatalistic comedy. Yet, Mexico remains dangerous because their domestic football culture is among the strongest that exists outside Europe and South America. Liga MX is commercially powerful, passionately followed, and structurally mature enough that Mexican clubs almost often treat regional competitions as matters of institutional dignity. The great fortress is Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, one of the few stadiums on earth that genuinely feels historical before the kickoff, because altitude helps. So does 100,000 people behaving as though silence would be dishonorable. Mexico also carries one of football's strangest emotional contradictions. A nation that deeply believes in its football importance, yet periodically suffers tournament outcomes that reinforce national irritation. This creates a fan culture of tremendous investment paired with immediate criticism, which is healthy in moderation. And for American viewers, one warning. If the United States should happen to meet Mexico in this tournament, assume that the atmosphere will not remotely resemble a normal home game, no matter what the ticket map says. Number 14, Japan. Japan is perhaps the cleanest example of what happens when a country decides, quite deliberately, to become excellent at football through planning rather than through folklore. Before the 1990s, Japan simply was not a major football nation. And then they proceeded to build one almost from scratch. The launch of the J1 League in 1993 transformed everything: modern clubs, infrastructure, youth systems, marketing, and long-term technical development. And unlike many ambitious projects elsewhere, Japan's football bureaucracy actually appears to have read the instructions. The result is a national team that now routinely qualifies, routinely competes, and increasingly defeats major powers without any sort of visible intimidation. Japan's style is disciplined, quick, technically tidy, and technically literate. They do not usually overpower opponents physically. Instead, they spend 90 minutes making better decisions than expected. This was gloriously visible in the 2022 World Cup, when Japan defeated both Germany and Spain, prompting global admiration and renewed suspicion that group stages are becoming hazardous for complacent Europeans. Japanese crowds deserve mention also. They are highly organized, musically inventive, and famous for cleaning up after themselves, which is weird, which remains one of the few recurring World Cup stories that makes the rest of humanity look administratively negligent. Japan rarely enters a tournament being among the primary favorites, but almost everyone who is serious about football now regards them as dangerous because they no longer behave like outsiders who are invited to politely participate. They behave like a country that has read the modern game very carefully and found several deficiencies. And if you underestimate that, you often discover far too late that they have already stolen 6 points off you. Number 15, the good old US of A. And yes, the United States belongs on this list, not because anybody rationally expects us to win the thing, but because the United States now occupies that awkward category where elimination by America would no longer qualify as a global absurdity. That alone marks enormous progress. Historically, American soccer lived under a peculiar handicap, a country wealthy enough to build anything, but culturally organized around sports that left soccer perpetually explaining itself. And yet, quietly, over the last 30 years since hosting the 1994 World Cup, the country has built real infrastructure. The Major League Soccer exists, survives, expands, and increasingly exports players abroad. American academies are no longer just theoretical. Young Americans now develop inside systems that simply did not exist when many current viewers were young enough to wear shorts without irony. The modern American side is younger, faster, and technically more comfortable than early generations were, although still occasionally prone to looking as though everyone met at the airport for the first time. Their greatest strength is their athletic range. Their greatest weakness is that many elite football nations still possess deeper tactical reflexes under pressure. And yet, the United States now produces enough competent players in serious European leagues that nobody dismisses them casually any longer, which means America has entered the dangerous middle class of world football, not feared, not mocked, but fully capable of ruining the evening of somebody who arrived thinking they were assuming comfort. And in tournament football, that is how reputations begin. And in monologues, this is how they end. And we got through this one without anybody rolling around on the ground faking an injury. So I think we can all agree that's a fairly big victory. Thanks ever so much for your kind attention. I now transmit you into the custody of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Why was I muted? Anyway, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Blast Radius. We're going to try this again directly from the top because we're professionals and that's how we do it. So I've got a couple of soccer. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a feature. It's a feature, not a bug.
Well, we can't all be perfect like some people I know. I got a question for you, Cap. You got to tell me, what's a ghost's favorite soccer position?
What is a ghost's favorite soccer position?
Goalkeeper.
Ooh.
Oh no, this is got to get worse, dude. Which soccer player has the biggest cleats? It's the one with the biggest feet.
I smacked my desk too hard and lost my camera. God damn it!
Oh no! What are we gonna do? Fix it.
I
Go and
told you we're professionals around here.
Yeah, we're gonna. This is gonna be great. Why shouldn't you play soccer in the jungle? That's my question.
Why shouldn't you play soccer in the jungle?
Because too many cheetahs.
Oh, what now?
All right, this one I got specifically for you, right? Why did the cricket ball break up with the bat?
Why did it do that?
They had too many hit and run relationships. And with that, we're going to wait until he fixes his camera. But until then,
still trying to get the I should have it back now. Just God damn it, give me 1 second.
All right. So, I've got a question for everybody.
Too many people in this world.
Are there really too many people in this world? Do we have a population problem, or do we have a different kind of problem that's being misunderstood? What do you reckon? Let me know in chat, because I really don't think it's actually a population issue, right? I mean, if you've ever tried to get anywhere in Alabama, you know there are vasty segments of Alabama that have nothing in them but a road. One. So, I don't know, you might have to miss me with that one.
Or at least that's the panic in the narrative that some people are pushing. Too many people, too many mouths, too many bodies strangling the tiny little blue planet we all share.
Okay, part of that's correct, and I'll get back to that in a moment.
We're only one bad harvest away from Mad Max becoming a documentary. And apparently, this has been just about to happen for around 200 years. Multiple generations of people waking up.
Okay, so he's not wrong. He is correct. Thank you, Abby. I appreciate it. Everything he just said is correct. The thing is, it's not true. The issue is not population. The issue is logistical. It's trying to provide the massive amount of resources each individual wants where they are at. The problem is transit. It's difficult to get enough stuff into New York City to satisfy New York City. In fact, it's never satisfied. Any chance we're going to get that sometime today?
I gotta restart.
Okay. Do what you got to do. Go ahead. This is the comic relief section of the thing. This is great. But yeah, no, it's logistical. It's not that there's too many people, and you can tell that anytime you look at a, say, L.A. or New York mayor. The New York mayor is telling all the rich people to leave, and what do you expect is going to happen when that happens? Their freaking tax advantages are just going to blow away. I mean, when you tell people that pay 90% of your taxes to get out, chances are you're going to lose a little bit of money.
Chances are.
So, how much of this have you followed up on?
Very little.
Okay, so the question is overpopulation an issue? Is it a real threat?
There are vast swaths of this planet where no human has ever set foot, and
right.
You can put populations, like you were saying, you can put populations of humans any place that you can get food and water and transportation.
The problem actually is that we are having difficulty with our modern transit issues, right? All of the systems that we rely on to supply New York City were actually designed back in the 40s and built back in the 60s. And so we're dealing with a almost 80, 75 year out of date system trying to do a modern thing, and it's not working very well. And I think that's to be expected.
The belief in some sort of overpopulation crisis correlates strongly with the place a person lives, because the people who believe such things nearly always live in super high density, big urban cities. So obviously they think the world is overpopulated. People don't think things like that who live out in the goddamn middle of Montana somewhere. When their nearest neighbors are 10 miles away, they don't think such things because they don't live in a place that's overpopulated. We have
right.
You might go ahead.
A lot of this stuff is a local thing. Our example in Georgia is Atlanta, right? Atlanta is in a very unique place, being relatively high in altitude. It has an international airport, but it is completely landlocked. And so anything that's brought in is brought in on trains or trucks. Now, there is one benefit. We have more trains, I think, than maybe only like Pennsylvania and freaking. There's only a few places out that has more trains than Georgia.
Yeah, and Atlanta's an interesting example because that is one of the world's first cities that was built to be a railroad terminus or a railroad nexus, or whatever you want to call it, rather than the reasons that people always used to build cities in certain places, which was, access to a water supply or a coastline or a strategically defensible location. But it's only in the middle of the 19th century that people start thinking, well, maybe let's put our town here and then we can have all the rail lines run into it. And it's really, you can see it when you look at an overhead map of Georgia, because all of the roads and all of the rail lines converge in Atlanta, and that's why they built the city there.
It goes further because when air travel became a thing, Atlanta was chosen for the Eastern Delta hub. And so if you got a plane ticket straight to hell, you'd have to do a layover in Atlanta. I don't give a shit where you were flying.
Yeah, it's there are places in the southeast of our nation where it's pretty much impossible to get to without going through Atlanta.
Right.
That's the magnitude of the transit hub that it is.
Well, it isn't impossible. It's just that to get there on a road worth driving on, because once you get off the interstate in Georgia, there's some really suspect methods of road building in this state, brother.
Yeah, it all comes down to how adventurous you want to be ultimately.
Right, and there's some pretty nasty places outside of downtown Atlanta.
And isn't Hartsfield Airport the highest volume airport in the country, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah,
or it was up until recently. Yeah.
The only thing I know of that competes with it is New York. Was that and what's the other one? LaGuardia.
Yeah, JFK and LaGuardia.
Yeah, they're close. But yeah, that southeast thing. I don't know why they bypassed Miami, but I guess maybe if you can just chop off all of Florida for deliveries, that probably has a global effect on your delivery prices and cost and stuff. But I mean, Atlanta's largely become an Amazon hub at this point.
I'm trying to think of how many big airports are even in between Atlanta and Miami. Maybe Orlando.
Most of them are military, frankly.
Yeah. And Orlando only because people are going to do Disney shit.
So we have rolled over into what I was actually wanting to do. You have a thing you want to do. Do you want to do the Peaky Blinders or do you want to do the Red Dawn comparison? Because the Red Dawn comparison is going to take longer.
Yeah, we'll do your thing first. I want to do the Red Dawn thing.
All right. So what we did, or what I did, I don't know if he did his homework. I mean, I didn't do my homework.
Well, I've seen both pictures. Does that count as doing the homework?
Sure, we'll count it.
I haven't. I mean, and the original Red Dawn is like my favorite movie from when I was 12. So I know that movie by heart. I don't need to watch it again. The later, much shittier version of Red Dawn, I've only seen one time, but I think I remember enough of it to be able to talk about how much it sucks.
Okay, well, I might have a strange take on that, because while I agree with you, the general plot dynamic and story is mediocre at best. It was not. The original Red Dawn did something in cinema that made Russians watch a movie and say that is the most Russian American movie I've ever seen in my life. It looked like it came straight out of some Eastern European fly-by-night studio that just whipped together something, except it has C. Thomas Howell, Patrick Swayze, and Charlie Sheen. So,
most importantly, it's got Leah Thompson for the win.
Agreed on that one too, because dear Lord, honey. Anyway.
Oh yeah, that's the picture that launched my Leah Thompson crush.
So I don't think it's actually fair to compare the two movies on a one-to-one basis, right? So let's take two steps back. Let's get rid of the iconography and the absolutely unbelievable casting choices that were available for the original Red Dawn, and let's look at it on its surface as what it's supposed to be. I think
I would call it less of a remake and more of a loose adaptation.
Exactly, it's more of a reimagining, and so we can't judge them apples to apples. So let's try some cantaloupes to apples. Let's see how this fits.
Let's do that.
So the first movie has almost nothing to do with the love interest. There's very little in the way of coming of age story. There is almost no aspect of it that is dedicated to the American growth of a teenager into a man. Almost all of that is handled cheekily and tongue in cheek by way of like deer hunting and other stuff. But it's all ensconced in like a mid World War II French resistance documentary and beautifully done as well.
We are here to do two things: piss in radiators and kill fucking Russians.
Exactly. And so this movie does everything it's intended to do by having all of the necessary ingredients without being an American picture depicting American teenagers doing American things, right?
Right.
This is something the second movie fails greatly at. I mean, it fails it well, and I've got to say that because the second movie is everything I just said the first movie wasn't.
Yeah.
And when you realize that these are two different stories, it doesn't hurt so bad, maybe.
The original picture puts us right in the middle of the events immediately. Like you mentioned, we don't have half of the first act spent getting to know our characters and having them do cute little teenager things, because the filmmakers want to emphasize the surprise and the terror of this sudden calamitous event that happened. and we don't need that opening 15 minutes of getting to know our characters and seeing them do normal teenage things, because the screenwriters have written a good enough script that we are able to get to know our characters through the course of their attempting to stay alive and kill Russians and free the country. And that's the way that you make that picture. They didn't even attempt to make a picture like that with the second Red Dawn because it was in the hands of much less capable screenwriters, I would submit.
I agree on every point you just said, but keep in mind the second movie's very different. We're not fighting the Russians. It's not an Axis powers situation of Russians and Chinese and Mexico and Cuba and all of this. That's not what's happening. This is
well, they changed the identity of the enemy in post-production, right?
Right. I get that, but still, just stick with me. Like I said, very different movie, not the same intentions, not meant to be the same movie. The primary protagonist in the film is not actually the military dude; it's his little brother. And when you realize that, it changes the dynamics of how this is all playing out. This becomes a coming of age story of a boy becoming a man. They include the girls, and this is something I think that was an error that should not have occurred, but it is a classic coming of age type thing where, you got a thing for a girl, but they went extra with it, right? The returning military hero from Iraq and Afghanistan also has a love interest, and the actual protagonist of the picture has a love interest, and the whole plot's tied up in trying to liberate them from the Korean army that has jumped into. And here's another feature. It was in Washington State, I think. Is that right? That's very different from Denver, bro. That's really different from Colorado.
Oh yeah, that's almost half a continent different.
Right. It almost makes zero sense for there to be a huge guerrilla movement in Washington State. If that's correct.
That is the part of the narrative that requires the most suspension of disbelief.
Unfortunately,
Russian paratroopers would be able to descend on suburban Denver, but if you're willing to let that one go, then they do fine after that mostly.
All right, so once you take into account that we're in Washington, we're not in Colorado. We are stopping a paratrooper division who has dropped in and trying to connect to the coast, rather than a paratrooper division that has dropped in and is trying to connect to Mexico through fucking Texas, right? So the Wolverines in the first movie had one solid thing going for them, and you can't argue with it. Their back door was fucking secure. They were not really worried about anybody rolling through Texas on them, and so that kind, we had a few paratroopers we got to deal with and shit, right? The Washington situation, totally freaking different, right? As soon as the paratroopers hit the ground, the military has physically rolled across the Canadian border and taken territory. You're literally behind enemy lines, not just in an occupied space.
I'm just now reminded, and I had forgotten all about it until we were talking about the location and you mentioned the Wolverines. But I recall now that I think I watched that movie for the first few years thinking the location was in Michigan because they said Wolverines. I thought they were talking about Michigan University, didn't realize they were talking about their high school team in Colorado, and that changed my whole conception of the movie.
Right. And I totally get that. Oh no, it's growling and won't pause because we're professionals, right?
That's a growling eagle right there.
Yeah, the eagle's growling. Oh, by the way, meet Jim. This is Jim. He'll be watching y'all.
He's the producer. He's the professional here.
Right. This is the look he gives me every time I screw up.
And if you piss him off again, he growls like a son of a bitch.
All right. So I'm going to mute this and just kind of let it roll in the background. There's the love interests really kind of screw the pooch on the whole thing, because in the first movie, the love interests were non-existent. They were not love interests. They were
and that's more interesting the more I think about it, because it seems like in the treatment of the female characters, the two versions should almost be reversed in time, because in 1984, when they made the original movie, it's actually pretty subversive for that period to depict those female characters as not being any sort of love interest for anybody, just being members of the team who want to get good at killing Ruskies, and that's the only thing they're there for. Though the Leah Thompson character and the Jennifer Grey character both, they are not treated the way that female movie characters traditionally in that type of movie are treated. They're, you know, they want to learn how to fight the bad guys and become, badass, awesome Russian killers, and so that's what they do. And and like you said, there's not even a hint of any love interest bullshit. We don't need any love interest bullshit because it wouldn't make the movie any better.
Facts. The fact that the two girls are brought into the team not as a byproduct of being a love interest or any interest whatsoever, but as a byproduct of they came into a country store off the beaten path because they thought maybe the Russians wouldn't have messed around over there, and they find out no, they've been here and they picked the shelves almost clean. We got a bunch of stuff from the back restocked, but what are you here for?
We got the hidden stuff.
Right, we got the hidden stuff. They're like, well, we need ammo, we need anything that would let us be more comfortable out in the woods, and we need any kind of canned food or anything like that. And he makes them a deal. I will hook you up with everything you need. Guns, ammo, anything. But you got to take these two girls with you because next time they're going to find them. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It even suggests that it took them out of a position where horrible things were already happening to them. And that's a undertone of the rest of the movie. You change that one dynamic and you end up having the whole John Hughes film that you end up getting with the modern version.
Yeah, and then it becomes just it very easily in different hands could have become stereotypical teen romance, with the backdrop of the Russian invasion. And thank God it didn't.
So once you deal with the love interest question and the coming of age question and the dear blood question and all of that silliness, you end up having nothing really to compare except for a handful of basic ambushes and a couple of after action stories, right?
Yep.
In the original, it ends with a monument being dedicated to the members of this particular guerrilla force who held at bay the back door of the Mississippi Valley long enough for the U.S. to get across the Mississippi. And once they penetrated far enough to get across the Mississippi, all of the resistance in this area fell down. And it was only because these kids made such a horrible stink in this area that the people, that the Russians weren't able to reinforce from this area as they expected to. And so it folded one side of the line and they were able to cross the Mississippi and take the Western U.S. back.
And we don't actually see them win. Which I think was a great choice on the part of the filmmakers. That the ending is kind of left a little bit emotionally ambivalent. They tell us that the good guys ultimately won, but they don't depict it. When normally you would expect a nice happy pro-America ending with a bow tied on it and everybody waves the flag and pumps their fists but they don't do that, and I think that makes it a better film also.
Another thing is when it gets down to the actual tactics utilized in the films, the first one's way sloppier on the actual tactical execution of these things. But then when you compare the situations in which the tactics were employed, it doesn't make it any better. The second film is set up in a medium to large town in Washington or wherever it's at, and the first movie is set up in a especially small town in Denver, in Colorado, And that distinction, I think, changes another dynamic in that when they're seeking, they keep picking up people. People just keep wandering out and finding them because they're also hiding from the North Koreans or whatever it is. And it's a very different dynamic when you add somebody to the group after it's been put together for 3 weeks, killing North Korean soldiers.
And it been together and already been through some adversity and some horror and some loss. And each time you add a new person, it does change the dynamic pretty severely. And it's also a function of something that goes back to the correct choice. I think we both agreed to not begin the picture by showing the kids doing ordinary kid stuff. And the traditional way to handle it would be to have our core group already together, already doing fun teenager stuff before the crisis presents itself. Whereas the way they actually treated it, which is much more realistic, is that the group comes together by completely haphazard means, just by running into this person, running into that person, please take my daughter, get her the hell out of here so the Russians don't,
Right. There's also this one distinction too. This guy is an actual military veteran. He's seen combat and he's home on some kind of leave or whatever when all of this kicks off. In the first one, do you know why Patrick Swayze was the leader of the Wolverines?
Captain of the football team?
He was captain of the football team. The previous year, he had graduated and was only there to see how his little brother did.
Right.
The only reason he was in town. Otherwise, I think he had a contract business or something. He was, quote unquote, the boss. And so when shit hit the fan and people started needing somebody to tell them what to do, and he started telling people what to do, they just did what he said. And that's how he ended up in command. Not because he meant to, not because he intended to, but just by dint of being a leader. This guy sort of leans on the concept of, I've been in the military and so I know more than you. And that may be true, but the personality really doesn't carry it. It comes across as thuggish instead of natural.
Yeah. And I try to be impressed with Chris Hemsworth, and I'm usually just not.
I mean, he may be a great actor. If so, I haven't seen him in anything that he was great in recently. Sorry.
I mean, I think his best work was done when they started making Thor into more of a funny comedy character, but then they ultimately took it way too far. But that was probably his wheelhouse right there. Was just physically imposing, but yet capable of self-effacement, poking a little fun at yourself, poking a little fun at the absurdity of the situation. When he tries to play it straight, there's something that just doesn't quite hit, and I'm not even sure I can explain why it is.
I totally get what you're saying, because I was just fixing to say something similar. In this movie, he plays the straight guy. He's always serious. He never really breaks character. He doesn't giggle at stuff. Welcome in, Connor. Good to see you, bud. Mayor, good to see you. Corin.
I forgot to say hello to the chat. Hello, chat.
Hi, chat. How are we doing today? Appreciate y'all coming through.
Indeed.
But yeah, when he plays a straight man, it's almost depressing. It's too straight. It's too straight-laced, too much of the thing. And in this one, because he also has a love interest that's involved in all of this, and it's an absolute ringer they're old high school sweethearts. They had to run away and do different things, and both of them have come back to the hometown now. One's divorced and the other's seeing other people, kind of thing. It's written in the stars, right? It's like every meet cute ever. And I think it takes away from what the movie could have been and turns it into something of a rom-com, which it was never intended to be.
Yeah, there's plenty of contexts in which you can do a rom-com, and communist invasion is not one of them. You want you want that movie to lean into the horrific aspects of the situation that the characters find themselves in, which the original film did a fantastic job of doing, and much of the way they achieved that was by not doing the things that we have credited them for avoiding, not doing the meet cute, the love interest shit, the typical teenagers on a typical day shit, avoiding all of that. And you actually make the premise of the film much more believable than it might be otherwise. And that's another thing that you have to grapple with, is that it's a premise that can devolve into parody really quickly if you don't handle it just right. Like we were talking about a minute ago, that it strains plausibility, the idea that a Soviet/Cuban invasion might succeed in penetrating suburban Denver with a couple thousand paratroopers.
So I've always wanted to do this. This is one of those things, and you're the perfect person to do this with. Let's move, and this is exactly what they did. How they landed in Washington or Seattle or wherever the hell they're at. How they decided to do it there, I'll never understand. But let's move it from there to, say, Chicago. Entire dynamics on this movie change. Suddenly it's one of those urban guerrilla fantasies out there, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. I mean, how many gangbangers out there you think are actually patriotic Americans? Like, you're going into the wrong fucking neighborhood, rolling with light work, bro. Your APCs ain't gonna cut it around here. These boys know what they're doing. They've been selling crack on this block for 30 years.
I'm trying to remember, and maybe you've watched the original more recently than I have, but I'm trying to remember if there were any lines explaining where they staged the invasion from, because if it was a joint Soviet-Cuban invasion, didn't they probably stage it from Cuba?
All right. From the very opening scenes, there's like a exposition writing on the screen, and then
you're right. Yep.
There's a couple of TV things happening. It sort of explains a little bit. There's not a lot, but there's a little. It's a Russian with Chinese support, Cuban access and missile coverage and air bases, and Mexican cover. So the Mexicans basically advanced on the border. The Russians airdropped a bajillion dollars in war material behind the borders, and the Cubans were launching boats and missiles from there, along with the air support coming in from off of Cuba. It's actually a fairly tidy little invasion plan if you've got the men and manpower and material.
I recall being kind of confused when I was 10 or 11 or however old I was when that movie came out, because you're used to the bad guys speaking Russian because the bad guys speak Russian in every movie. It's the Cold War. It's the 1980s, for God's sake. But then sometimes the bad guys are speaking Spanish. And it took me a few extra viewings to figure out that some of the bad guys are speaking Spanish because it's a joint Soviet-Cuban invasion. So okay, but yeah, that did make my little brain go haywire a little bit on my earliest viewings of it.
Right. One of the things that I did appreciate in the second movie is the Cuban guy. Or he might have been Venezuelan or Argentinian or something. It's important where he's from. I can't remember. This dude, occasionally throughout the movie, you'll hear him make references to other invasions that he's been involved in, and how that this isn't how this is supposed to go. I mean, the population is supposed to immediately do what you tell them to do, and there's a handful of guerrillas out there that fight us. And
when he's reviewing all the casualties. I've seen this before in such.
That's not what's happening. What's happening here is an underground revolution that has already been in place and established before we showed up, and they're just reacting the way they've been trained to react. This is not something that you can stamp out. We've killed 8 or 10 of them, and they just keep coming back like cockroaches. And he, in his experience, this is a losing battle. You don't win against this type of enemy who has gone to ground so tightly, and that is something I can kind of see being useful in the second movie that you really don't get from the first movie. You get all of that exposition from the down pilot, which I thought was a Russian plant the whole time.
Yeah, and I was going to mention him because you were talking before about how in the second movie you've got the Chris Hemsworth character who supposedly is either ex-military or current military. The point being, he's got some military tactical experience that he can bring to bear on the situation. But in the first movie, the only professional military person that our heroes ever interact with is the Air Force pilot that gets shot down, and he's he's able to teach them a few things here and there, but ultimately he has to get killed because obviously he has to get killed. But he is able to. It does make it a tiny bit more believable that they are able to encounter a military professional who is able to impress a little bit of military knowledge upon them. I think that helps the narrative.
Yeah. All right. We got 15 minutes to cover Peaky Blinders if you'd like. Do you want to do the 2-minute and 40-second trailer first and then do the thing, or do you want to do the thing, then the trailer?
Let's do the trailer first.
All right.
Tommy, you live in a house haunted with ghosts of people who died because of you. You abandoned your kingdom, and you abandoned your son.
How does it feel to be a poor blood hanging from a nail?
Your gypsy son is running the Peaky Blinders like it's 1919 all over again.
I could tell his secrets that would turn you pale.
I can't help him because I'm not that man anymore.
I need to know that you are willing to take part in an act of treason that will decide this war for Germany.
The world don't give a fuck about me. And I don't give a fuck about the world.
I've heard you decided this wasn't your war.
It is now.
How does it feel to be a freak among the freaks?
I'm looking for your son.
Who the fuck are you?
Everybody stay calm, because this man, ladies and gentlemen, is Tommy Shelby.
Who the fuck is Tommy Shelby?
But I just want to explain to him who I am. Once, I nearly got fucking everything. But nearly doesn't count.
How does it feel to be a savage and a beast?
Okay. I might watch this.
It is the first thing that comes to mind is the performance by Cillian Murphy, which it's really a different portrayal of the character than we've ever seen before. And I don't know if this has to do with the fact that they're aging him up and his hair is colored gray, but I feel like his performance in this latest iteration of Tommy Shelby is very much influenced by his role as Robert Oppenheimer a few years ago. And I wonder if every role he plays from here on in is going to be, materially, discernibly influenced by that performance. Like if it winds up being the touchstone of his entire career. Because I think he brings what's the term I want to use? He brings a world weariness to this version of Tommy Shelby that I don't think was ever evident before. There was some of it there, but it's hard to describe, but it is somehow expressed differently now, and I wonder how much that has to do with with the Oppenheimer thing. And I think because obviously that's probably going to wind up being the defining performance of his career. So, why shouldn't all the things he does subsequently be influenced by it? I think I probably need to watch it another time or two. I think I like it. The thing I like the most about it is my favorite thing about Peaky Blinders is that it's a Western. You set aside the British setting, everything about it in its composition and its execution, it's a British Western. Everything they do in that show is a Western. Everything in this movie is a Western. If you move the setting out of Birmingham, England in 1940 to the Old West in 1880, it would still work just as well, because let nobody ever say there isn't any such thing as a British Western, because this is one. And the Peaky Blinders series absolutely was a British Western. And what a visually gorgeous movie this is. There were actually a few times where I lost track of the story because I was paying so much attention to the aesthetic and the visual. It's one of those films where it seems like every shot is a work of art in its own right. And especially the juxtaposition between the ugly and the brutal, and the shiny and the beautiful, particularly like a brand new shiny car driving down a bombed out, ruined, destroyed street. Things like that. The juxtaposing of the one thing with the other. Would there actually be a car that clean and shiny in wartime Birmingham in the middle of the Blitz? Probably not, but I'm willing to overlook it, because
if there was, it would be driven by a gangster.
Yes, if there was, it would be fucking Tommy Shelby's car.
All right, I can accept that.
Didn't we kind of always have to know that this story would wind up with Tommy Shelby versus the Nazis? I was kind of surprised when they left the last season of the show in, I think it was like 1935. I think we picked this movie up about half a decade from where we left off with the last episode of the series. I kind of always hoped they would carry it into the war at least, but they didn't. They stopped in 1934 or 35, and they had all that stuff with Oswald Mosley and the British Union of Fascists, which also presents itself in this movie too, and I think it's well done. The central conceit of the narrative is that the Nazis want to introduce a bunch of counterfeit British currency into the economy to cause hyperinflation and crash the economy and win the war that way, which I understand it's based on a real thing that they attempted to do, which I wasn't aware of. And I like it when historical fiction makes me aware of actual history that I didn't know before. And that's one of the things I like.
Here's a good one. You'll love this. So that's still something of a problem. Apparently the right banknotes of American currency were so good that occasionally caches of them are found in Europe to this day. And it takes a full-on FBI investigation and special, Secret Service investigation into each cache of bills that are found in Europe have to be verified as being legitimate. And apparently it's really hard to tell. They had really, really good forgers over there.
And in fact, that's the very first scene of the picture opens in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where they have the prisoners working on making the fake pound notes. And that's one profession that if you got to the concentration camp and you were a printer or an engraver, if you were somebody that the Nazis could use for forgery purposes, you were not going in the death chamber. You didn't have to worry about getting yourself killed, because that was just about the most valuable trade you could possibly have. They had plenty of work for you to do in terms of making fraudulent banknotes and travel documents and such and such.
I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that they were also making Japanese notes before they ever allied. That they had already had a plan how to bankrupt Japan after they finished their usefulness.
It is a pretty slick way of winning a war. without engaging in any actual hostility. Obviously, you are engaging in hostility, but it's a fun other thing you can do to domestically destabilize your opponent. It's the kind of thing you hear about and you wonder, why the hell doesn't everybody do that in every war? Because what a great idea.
Well, they kind of do. They try. It's just
Yeah.
that modern banknotes are quite sophisticated at this point. So,
But the point
likely.
being that the Third Reich has made all these fake British banknotes, and they are liaising with the British Union of Fascists, the ones who aren't in prison, because most of them were in prison by this point after the war had started. But they are liaising with the British fascists, who are then liaising with organized crime in the form of the Peaky Blinders gang in Birmingham and other criminal gangs operating in other cities too. And so obviously each of the crime families has a bit of a moral conundrum, which is part of our narrative too. Do I want to engage in this malfeasance and make myself a bunch of money, or am I okay with doing that if it results in my country being defeated in a war? Where does my patriotism run up against my self-interest? And especially, it's an even bigger conundrum with the Peaky Blinders family, because these are Irish gypsies living and operating in England. They aren't people who normally have a whole hell of a lot of allegiance to the British state, and that's one of the moral dilemmas that brings itself to bear over the course of the movie. I'm trying to think of other examples, and there's only, I think, 2 I can think of where a TV show has left off, and then 4 or 5 years later, they make a sequel movie. They did it with Firefly, obviously. They did it with Deadwood. That was even longer. I think that was about 10
Speaking
years
of
after-
which, Firefly has an animated series coming out here, like real freaking soon. They're working.
does
on
it?
Yes, and it involves almost all of the original cast members' voices. And I just want to say this. I want to be perfectly clear. Listen, all of you, everyone involved, cast members, all of you, don't fuck this up. We need this. We have to have this. If you ruin this, I pity you.
Is this the first thing they've done with the original
Since
cast?
Serenity.
Wow.
Serenity, yes.
That's over 20 years now.
Yes, sir. And Serenity was 10 years after the end of the episode of the series. So
I think the series was in 01 and the movie was 05 or 06. So half a decade, which is about the same time as Peaky Blinders, because that show finished 4 years ago. I think it finished in 22. We're in 26 now, so 4 years later, and it's
works.
and this is a case where the actual amount of time is the same as the amount of time that's gone by in the context of our narrative. So at least they didn't have to put on hideous old age makeup on everyone. Just a little bit of gray hair color will do it. But I think they did fine. I'm going to watch it once or twice more. I
got a wild card to throw at you.
Okay.
When they were discussing the Dr. Von Doom casting, that dude from Peaky Blinders was one of the people I threw in the hat, and everybody thought I was weird for it. Give me one reason why he couldn't do a Von Doom.
Who, Murphy?
Yeah, I think he would do great.
It never occurred to me, but I think you're right. Yeah, I like that cast.
I mean, he is just like you said, the world weary aspect of his character carries through the Doom, and his ability to act aloof above everyone else in the room while not making it obvious that he's doing it.
And to affect a manner of being brilliant but vaguely dangerous, let's say.
Yeah, only vaguely dangerous. That's the trick, because you're in a room when you're dealing with Von Doom, you're in a room full of dangerous motherfuckers. They're all dangerous.
Yeah. And that was always one of my favorite things about his portrayal of Tommy Shelby, is that he's actually quite a mild-mannered bloke, but he is still able to affect an air of menace that makes it unmistakable that this isn't a man that you want to fuck with if your desire is to remain alive.
He walks into a room full of gangsters that are known for bloodshed, and they all shut the fuck up immediately.
Everybody cowers behind the bar, just like in the trailer. He doesn't even need to raise his voice or say any vulgar words. Just, I'm gonna stand here. I'm gonna stand here being Tommy Shelby, and you motherfuckers all cower behind the bar because you know what's good for you. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks ever so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius tonight. We sure hope you enjoyed it. We enjoyed it. We probably enjoyed it more than you did, but I don't want to make any presumptions on your behalf. We're going to see you back here next week, Sunday, as we always do, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. We hope you have a fantastic day tomorrow and an edifying Tuesday and just an unbelievably joyous Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. We basically hope your entire week is just absolutely top-notch because we only want the best for you. You are the best audience in the business, after all. Have a great evening. We will see you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.